like to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Colin Giles. I'm the head of the School for Animation and Visual Effects here at Vancouver Film School. So if you're in one of the animation programs, hello again. And if you're in one of our other programs, maybe you've seen me on day one in orientation, or I bumped into you at some point in a coffee shop around the neighborhood. Welcome to you too as well. So great to have you here. And we are super excited to welcome Catherine Winder, who is the, I have different titles for you, but you are the sort of co-creator, the owner, president of Wind, Sun, Sky Entertainment right here in Vancouver. So it's amazing to have you. Thank you, Catherine.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here tonight.
Awesome. We even have some people joining us from Nigeria. So we've got people from around the world, not just here in Vancouver. So super excited to have everyone here. So yeah, just to get some housekeeping out of the way, this is being recorded. So I'll watch my language in case my mom checks this out later. And then welcome to everybody here. It does look like we've got some people from around the world, so that's amazing. And like I said, some guests from all across the school. We do have our chat open, so feel free to just sort of chat away in there. Behind the scenes is Vanessa Kliski and Alana Rasso, who's going to be helping us run the show. They'll be going through some of the questions and stuff as well, and just flagging stuff for us. But if you do have a question, don't wait on it. Put it in the Q&A, which is right down there in the bottom bar, right next to the chat. It's sort of a double talk bubble. You can go in there, type your question, and after about 35 minutes, we'll get to some Q&A, and Catherine will be more than willing to share all her answers to your questions. So yeah, if something comes up and you don't want to forget about it, just go ahead and type it in, and they'll be waiting for us when we get to the other side. So that's enough from me. We're here to hear from you, Catherine. Why don't we just start with a bit of a journey? How does somebody get to the point in their career of owning a studio? Where does that idea come from? Where does the passion for it coming from? Maybe just kind of give us as Cole's Notes version of that journey as one could possibly.
I will try. I've been doing this a long time, but my journey started by putting a backpack on my back. I was curious. I wanted to see the world. I traveled around the world after I finished university, ending up in Tokyo, of all places, after about 14 months. And was very fortunate to land a job at Disney Studios. And Disney out of LA had bought an animation studio in Tokyo with the goal of producing their TV series in Asia. And as we all know, different cultures communicate different ways. And there were some challenges between the Americans and the Japanese. And I, at the time, had lived in Japan for about a year before I got the job. And the Japanese hired me because I was Canadian, and they felt I understood both cultures to help bridge the gap and open up communication. And I wasn't fortunate to go to animation school like you guys. We didn't really have Vancouver Film School way back when I was going to school. But I got my education on the job, and the Japanese trained me how they made animated cartoons. So that's how I got my technical training. And then I learned all about the process of how TV shows are made from the perspective of the studios in Asia. The Japanese worked with studios in Korea and Taiwan. And so I got to travel on their behalf and look at the shows and work with the artists and the producers, and then act as a bridge and communicator with the studio and producers and artists and directors in Los Angeles. So I was thrown right into the fire, and I learned a ton. That was the beginning. But my dream was to get to LA, and I managed to. I did a project after Disney. I did a project in Taiwan and worked on a movie, and then I got hired by Hanna-Barbera and Turner. At the time, Turner had just bought Hanna-Barbera to start the Cartoon Network, and so they needed somebody who understood international production because they were expanding all the shows they were doing, and so they hired me and brought me to LA. And it was great. I started in television. I learned the business from both a studio where they were making the cartoons, but also a buyer, the Cartoon Network, a broadcaster. So there's two different perspectives in the business, because you've got to create, while we all want to create just things we're passionate about, there needs to be a business reason to produce something. And so I got to see it from both sides, working with the Cartoon Network and Hanna-Barbera to find content and creators and talent. And out of that, we produced a show called What a Cartoon. And from that came Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Lab, and a whole bunch of long-lasting television shows that have turned into all sorts of different things that I'm sure you're probably familiar with. But it was fantastic training. And then I felt that I was working in more of an executive capacity. So it's very high level. And I didn't know the real technical side from the North American perspective, meaning I learned how it worked for animators and artists in Asia, but the materials that were put together in North America and sent to Asia were a very different type of technique. It's really the blueprint and the creative vision. So I got an opportunity to produce a show way back called Eon Flux. It was created by a guy named Peter Chung, who's a very strong Korean-American visionary. And I decided to go and work as a producer on that and roll up my sleeves and get very involved in the details and the day-to-day of how shows are produced from the North American perspective to round out my education. And then I continued on in television. I worked for HBO. I set up a studio there to adapt a comic book called Spawn into an animated series. And then I pivoted over to television, from television over to feature films, working with Fox Feature. And I set up Blue Sky, which unfortunately no longer exists because it got bought by Disney. But I oversaw Ice Age, and that was the first animated film ever produced in CG after a Pixar movie. So that was a really exciting, challenging, educational experience as well. And then I started working my way up the coast back to Canada. I stopped over in Marin County, Northern California, and I worked after Fox for George Lucas to adapt the Star Wars world into animation, producing the Clone Wars and pulling the whole team together for that, and building a studio in Asia and North America. So drawing on all the experience I had early in my career. And then found my way back to Canada. And I worked at a company called Rainmaker, now called Mainframe, for a while. And then I also adapted the Angry Birds property, the game, into an animated feature film. And I produced it in Canada and in the States, combination, 2 different locations. And then stepped back and said, well, I've had all these great learnings. I've worked on many large household names, brands. I've worked with iconic filmmakers. What I want to do next is produce content in Canada that is creatively driven, that the rights stay in Canada, and that I work with talent and really push technology and storytelling and do something unique here in Vancouver. So hopefully that was short enough.
I love how you can just
between, but
you can just drop in these things where you're like, you planted these seeds and they became, Blue Sky, or the Clone Wars, where you find someone like Dave Filoni, and now you've got the Mandalorian. Like, I mean, the roots that have come from some of the things you've been involved with, including Rainmaker here in Vancouver, and it's just amazing, including my own sort of quasi personal connection there, which is, What a Cartoon really kept me employed for a number of years, because I did a lot of work with the Cartoon Network marketing team for
nice.
Cartoon Fridays. And I mean, everything I animated was Powerpuff Girls and Dexter's Laboratory. So I know
there you go
as well. So here we are. It's come full circle a little bit.
It's a small world, right? Well,
absolutely.
I mean, that's the beauty of animation. You guys are all at school right now and getting to know each other, and all those connections you make in the early days are going to blossom as you all take off into different career paths, but you'll all interconnect again. It's actually quite extraordinary how you overlap.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the idea of like producing these films here in Vancouver. I mean, I started my career 25 years ago here in Vancouver, and had gone through the ups and downs of, starting in classical and shifting into CG and just the nature of the industry. And now, of course, just the sheer scale of the amount of productions and the kind of productions that are being done here in Vancouver, it's just changed so fast. And to have now your footprint here too is really exciting. So maybe for those of us who are here in Vancouver Film School, maybe you can speak a little bit to the industry here in Vancouver itself and where you see it with this sort of vast array of experience that you have.
Well, the industry in Vancouver is booming, as you say. It's pretty exciting. I moved back to Canada middle of 2009, and I remember thinking, well, I'm going to come up here. I want to go back to my roots and bring my kids and see what Canada's like, because they had only lived in the States, and I'm, Canadian originally. And I'll spend a few years here because I'm worried it's a little bit sleepy. I'm so used to busy LA and Tokyo and New York, et cetera. And I'm worried that it may not be enough energy for me. But once I got here, it not because of me, just coincidentally, it's the industry just really started to shift and take off. And there's just been so many opportunities coming our way. It's kind of mind-boggling. And I believe that Vancouver is the largest digital hub at the moment in the world. And there's just a tremendous amount of opportunities in the gaming space and in the traditional linear television space, the feature film, and then all of the other gamification of storytelling and multiple platforms, from AR to VR, et cetera. I mean, there's so many opportunities for you guys as creators and paths to take. It may even be challenging. It's easier in my day, where it was pretty clear there was television and there was feature films. There wasn't even games, but then games evolved, and there are 3 paths you could take. Now there's 20 paths within each of the different sectors and formats. But it's great. So you've got lots of opportunities and ways, opportunities and paths, and to follow your passion.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when I started, it was like you do this one thing and that's what you're going to be doing. And there was really even though there was rumblings that, computer animation was coming, it was just kind of, that's what it was. But now it's like the cross platform that, in education, even in one of our animation programs, can lead to so many different things. I wonder what especially as a producer and being on the production side of things, what's your take on sort of like becoming adaptable? These are students that are either going to be joining VFS very soon or in the program and are looking at not just a job, but like a career. And you're talking about your left turns and moving across the country, across the world, and adapting to new developments, and sort of taking advantage of opportunities. What is your viewpoint on looking ahead for a student who's kind of like looking at someone who's kind of like gone through this journey so far in their career, and they've got all these years ahead of them? What about adaptability, and where do you think there's some trends going that students could really look at? And it doesn't necessarily have to be artistic or technical.
Well, first and foremost, your career is an ever evolving journey. So it's not about the destination, because that is going to always be shifting. And you're going to be figuring out your path, which, let's face it, is going to be windy, because these days technology is just changing at such a rapid pace. It's hard to even envision where we're going to be in 5 years. We're in the middle of tectonic shifts in the industry as it fractures, as there's so many different platforms, and the democratization of content, meaning in the early days of content, and not even in old days, which are like just a few years ago, it wasn't easy to get your own content out there. But now anybody can upload their game on Roblox, or their show, or their short on YouTube. So it's pretty exciting times for creators. With that said, there's a lot out there. So how do you cut through? But as a student and looking ahead and thinking about your career, what I would say, and what I've done all the way through, is I follow my interests. So look at what is fun for you. And while it's important to you have to have a paycheck, but whenever possible, choose passion over paycheck. Everything I've done, I've had to feel in my gut like I can stand behind. I'm going to be proud of. I've got it. It's when you do a project, it takes so much, a little piece of you goes into it, that lives on a screen. And so, if it's always better to be doing something that speaks to your heart, as ultimately, again, it's going to be on the screen. And so whatever I do, I have to feel inspired. But I'm also willing to take calculated risks and jump into something that may seem kind of crazy up front. And in doing that, you might just find yourself on a path that you never thought of, and it could catapult your career. There's so many opportunities now. It's catapulting your career, and coming up with something different and passionate is really, truly a great opportunity for all of you.
Yeah, it's like there's so much options out there that weren't there before. It's almost blinding. There's just so much that could be attached. And I think to any part of what students are learning at the school. And one of the things that I think, we talked about this a little bit before everyone logged on, which is the idea of production, which is, with so much content out there, it has to be produced. Somebody has to lead the way. You have been in a position to start studios and be, sort of surround yourself in that ecosystem. I'm just sort of wondering if you can sort of shed a light on what a producer does. I think it's the one thing that's a little difficult to really have a student experience that. Now, in my years of experience, this is the advice I give to students, which is, make friends with your producer. They're the first on and the last off, not only daily, but on a production usually. And they're a hugely important part of the creative process as well, not just, deadlines and shopkeeping. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how your job has evolved as well over the years, and what the goal of a producer is on any given production.
Well, there's a wide range of producers to start. There's executive producers, there are line producers, there's supervising producers. And so each one has its own sort of unique role depending on the format. That's why I wrote a book called Producing Animation. And part of it was to help define the different producers, because to your point, it can be confusing. But overall, I see the role of a producer is someone who is, as you said, starting from the beginning. I remember a blank page, and you've got to build the business plan and figure out how to execute within the parameters and resources you've been given. So for every project, there's so much money, there's so much time, there's certain goals. And it's not strictly about money and goals. I mean, obviously your goal, ultimately the idea is to get the most on the screen, the best story, the most compelling characters. But backing up before something is made, of course, and this is for you guys as you're creating things, that's really important. But really important is also, is there an audience for it? So as a producer, you got to step back, or as an executive or somebody greenlighting the project. Because again, I could be a producer who's actually financing and greenlighting it, or I'm hired by somebody who's greenlit the project and financing and investing and taking the risk. So before those decisions are made, we need to know that there's actually an audience for it, and that it's financeable, and that we're going to recoup the investment. Or there may be a decision that it's not only about recouping an investment, that it's just an investment and we don't care about making money. But most of the time, investors want to make money. So the producer's job is to ensure that the investment that they're making is solid and creatively viable. So going back to, you put the production plan together. Who are you going to hire? When are you going to hire them? And what is everybody going to do? How long is it going to take? What are the specific requirements per person per day in order to achieve your budget and schedule? So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece is juggling the constantly evolving creative needs of a project. As you start to bring characters to life, things shift. This is working, this isn't. Oh, we need more of this, less of that. And so as a strong producer, your job is to kind of step back and look at the whole picture and provide the key stakeholders. So that could be your financiers, that could be your executives, that could be your director, a menu of options. Okay, if we want this, well, we can't have this, or we can have this, but we can't have that. And so it's always looking and stepping back and figuring out how to juggle the resources you have to get the most on the screen. And all the way along, you're acting as a coach, a therapist for the team to keep them inspired, because animation typically is a journey. It's a long haul. It can take years to produce a movie. It can take multiple years to produce a movie, or maybe a year to produce a series. And so keeping everybody inspired and focused on what the goals are. And then also being in a place where, whenever possible, like I said, again, stepping back, having fresh eyes and looking at the creative and saying, is it working? Is it not? And if it's not, being courageous enough to stop and step back and make some changes and do it in a way that can be as nimble and be able to pivot as fast as you can. Not always easy when you're, say, on a movie where you've got hundreds and hundreds of people that could be across the globe. So again, juggling, basically you're the umbrella for a project, and there to ensure that it's delivered on time, on schedule, at the creative level and expectation that was set out at the beginning.
Right. And as we have talked before, this, everyone joining us here, is the idea that a lot of times when you're producing something, before any artists are hired or before any production has begun, the actual IP or the idea has been, sort of gesticulating for years sometimes, or, has been in the process of being greenlit. And now in today's market, even just getting that greenlit, to coin something you said, is really just the starting point. So I know you've got a very awesome way of looking at this, and you've called it the gamification of some of the IP, but this sort of ripple effect, this sort of 360 version of creating content nowadays, and having to be nimble and having to be aware of all the different avenues that your content or your IP is going to be presented at some point. It's not just a singular event anymore. It's not just a 2D animated cartoon. It could be many different things. So I know you have some examples of that and have a really great presentation of slides that sort of illustrates that for us. So I was wondering if you had an opportunity to bring those up, because I think it's just an awesome way to visualize exactly what it is you're sort of encountering now, and the sort of the mission you've got for your own studio.
So my studio, as I mentioned earlier, is working at the intersection of technology and storytelling. I've throughout my career, I've always been curious about technology and looking to try new things and push the envelope. And it's all ultimately culminated in the philosophy and approach that we take at Wind, Sun, Sky. That curiosity combined with my experience of working on some large brands like a Star Wars or Angry Birds, and seeing that audiences are looking for a 360 experience. It is not enough, especially today, to have simply one single offshoot of a show, of a project, just a show, but rather we need to be thinking about how to build a long-term franchise, and that it needs to be cross-platform. And so this is just one example, and it's a phased approach. So when we bring in a project or a new property, we need to know that at some point it can have be extended in multiple formats. And so the way we start is in the center here, we have the property, the IP. It could be a character, it could be a toy, it could be a game, it could be anything, or it could be talent. It could be an influencer, or a very strong creative visionary. And then what we do is we work with our team and them, and we sort of plot out a universe Bible. How are we going to bring these characters to life? What kind of stories are we going to tell? It's like a roadmap that's built. And we decide, well, what is the most financially feasible part of the property to get greenlit? So it may be that it's a series, or it may be a game. a couple of years ago, we adapted a property called My Singing Monsters. It's a game that was created out of London, Ontario, hundreds of millions of downloads. And they came to us and said, listen, we're game, we don't really know how to extend properties. Could you help us? And the first thing we did in that case was we created a universe Bible. We worked with them and figured out which characters were the most popular with their fans and how could we evolve them. And then we started by doing a toy line for them. And then we actually created a live animated show and that's another conversation we can get into. But essentially, each property is brought to life in a phased approach. So starting with the creative, which characters, the stories we're going to tell, and then how do we build? We may go and do a Roblox game, as I said, or merchandising. And then when the property warrants it, is catching, is building fandom, is becoming popular, then you'll be able to finance more and you start to extend out. And as I said, every single one of these properties is unique. The approach that you're going to take.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's funny because it really is, at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing, it comes down to the idea. It comes down to is it a good idea? Which is so great. Like, no matter how many hundreds of years from now or before, it always just comes down to, is this something that is going to engage other people through storytelling? And now we're just seeing this huge array of ways that we can share stories with each other.
Exactly. And I'll just go to the next slide then, because that is a perfect segue. Thank you, Colin. Which is it a good idea? And so every studio will have its submission criteria and be based on what the goals of that company is. What are their KPIs? So what are their deliverables? How are they going to run a business effectively? And so in our case, we're about 40, a studio of about 40 people. And we love to partner. We love to bring in complementary partnerships and studios that extend our business. So typically we'll look for some kind of partner. That could be a creative partner, a technical partner, when we're reviewing IP. We really need to see cross-platform potential. Most likely we'll just start with one format, be it a long form series. We may develop a movie or a game, but there'll usually be one. But we need to know there'll be more opportunities in the future that the characters, the ideas can translate beyond, like a Star Wars, right? Obviously, that's the ultimate property that is in every single extension possible, but ultimately came from great characters that everybody loved and wanted to learn more about. So that's important to us. Back to what I said earlier, you need an audience. You need to know that there's going to be an audience. In our case, we try and bring in something that already has a pre-existing audience. So in the case of My Singing Monsters, it had 100 million players or downloads. So there was people that already loved those characters. And so it made sense for us to start working on all the different extensions. Again, content possibilities that it can extend, that we can see that there's a financial upside because we're a for-profit business. And very important to us is diversity, that there's diversity in our characters and the stories we're telling, the talent we're bringing in. That's critical.
So nice to have it so clearly, it's like I said, it's like a roadmap. It's here's, and you can always bring it back down to your idea again. Does it have these possibilities, right? That's
exactly. So hopefully that helped.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's take a look at your studio now. What are you, of what you can talk about, I suppose. What's exciting and what's coming up for Wind, Sun, Sky Entertainment, in terms of, now that you've got this really a really solid plan in place of how you can execute. What are you executing on?
Well, right now we are working on an adult animated comedy called Psycops. And just back to what we talked about, how long it takes to get projects up and running. It can, if you're lucky, it can take a short time, but most can take years. And in the case of this one, we've got two strong, hilarious Canadian creators. And I met them about 5-6 6 years ago, and they had this great idea and a little demo they'd created. And we really believed in it. We teamed up with them and another company called Oddfellows. And as much as we wanted to get it going right away, it took us 5 years to get the financing, which is crazy, but not uncommon. It's pretty standard. And so that show is going to be on Adult Swim. It's kind of a Rick and Morty type of companion show. It's so out there. You guys are going to love it. That'll be coming out this winter. And then we're also heavily into the Roblox space because, as I mentioned it a little bit earlier, I believe that it is the new frontier. If you don't know Roblox, it's essentially the YouTube of gaming. YouTube, anybody can go and upload a video, start their own channel. Roblox, you can go in and create your own game. And that's what we've been doing. We've got a couple games there, but we're not only producing games, but we've been doing it in a cross-platform way. So we have a brand new property. It's a little bit of a risk called Camp Bonkers. It's not easy to start a new property these days because there's so much out there, but it's a game, and it's basically, it's camp for kids 6 to 10-ish, anytime, anywhere in the world. And they can go on. It's wacky. There's food fights and ghost searching and hand gliding and fishing. But then we also have a YouTube channel that we're building called Camp Bonkers. And on it, we have camp challenges led by a camp counselor who's doing fun things. And the idea is to get kids not only to connect with them in the real world, in the virtual world, but get them in the real world doing real things. And then if they do these real things, some of the challenges, they can go to our website, campbonkers.com, and they can earn badges. And if you earn a badge by doing a challenge in the real world, you get a Roblox code. And then you can take that Roblox code and go into Roblox and then do it all again. So it's not easy. It's 3 platforms that we're trying to build fandom around, but it's a really exciting experiment as we learn about this new world and where our audience is. And I mentioned earlier to you before we got on with everyone, Roblox has 48 million daily concurrent players. So it's huge. And it hasn't yet started doing its own streaming. It does a little bit. It does event streaming. But it's also a place where I believe that video streaming will take place, and you build communities there because the community it's all interactive in each of the games. So it's pretty exciting stuff. So we're in kids space doing that, and then we're in the adult space producing a show like Psychops.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's the industry we're in, right? You can have your finger in all kinds of different areas and different audiences because there's so many different audiences out there, which is amazing and something to be. Well, you need a plan, that's for sure, and you need to solve the pitch for, as you said, a new idea. So I think that's a segue for myself to get to some of these questions because. Sure. We've got quite a few really great ones, and I'm gonna start with the biggest one that I have on the list so far, which is from Sebastian. So thank you, Sebastian, for bringing your question here, and he thanks you so much for doing this. Sebastian's question is: what are the primary aspects that producers and executives look for in a project or pitch, whether it's for television or film, and that will make the said project enticing to a studio? And then as a short follow-up, as a producer, what have you seen are contemporary industry trends in film and television, in terms of the genres and low budget, high concept type stuff? So maybe we'll start with that first part. Like what makes a good pitch?
Pitching is hard. It takes a ton of work. And the key to a strong pitch is simplicity, that your message is clear, that you can say what it is, the story you're telling, and what you're selling in 10 minutes or less. That's really important. There's no one rule for the ultimate pitch that an executive is looking for, because as I mentioned, each studio has its own criteria in terms of what it is that they're looking to do. And so if you're going to pitch, the most important thing is that you've done your homework. Don't go in and just pitch anything to anyone. Every single broadcaster, production company is looking for something specific. So that's on you to do that heavy lifting and figure out who it is you want to team up with. And it may be, especially as you're new, that you go to a production company who has relationships with broadcasters and buyers and financiers, and team up with them, and then have them take you as your and you can learn from a studio on how to pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no one rule, but again, simple, clear, and in most cases, it needs to have it needs to be have the ability to really bring in an audience. It's not about just this is as I said at the beginning, it could be a creative, fun idea, but if it's not marketable and there's no audience for it, it's not going to work.
Yeah. And it can have a universality to it, of course, but it can also be, where is the audience for that? It could be kids, it could be adults, it could be cultural. And yeah, I think something that's important there, and you mentioned it, certainly via Star Wars, is just characters, right? Like every pitch has some character base to it, right? That's what we're going to connect with. So
100% compelling characters that you care about. What is their journey? Why does it matter? Why do I want to see these characters be brought to life?
Right, exactly. Awesome. Well, I guess the second part of that question was in terms of trends. Are you noticing any trends in terms of the sort of the IP? I see, I see a lot of people trying to copy the Paw Patrol, model right now. You see a lot of talking trains, and I worked on Thomas Tank Engine for many years, so I know that world of the cross-platform, situation, and a lot of people try and rubber stamp that, which is not always successful, and sometimes it is. But have you noticed anything in the television or film or gaming world that's kind of trending, or is it kind of still fractured?
I think it's pretty fractured. And I think there's, again, there's so many different buyers and opportunities that it depends. And this is going back to what I call my words of wisdom, is go with what you're passionate about and focus on that type of content, and then find the right partners for you. So if you really want to do horror, then that's figure out who's doing that and find your way in, or comedy. But given the number of platforms and streaming options, which is exponentially growing daily, I don't feel like there's one specific approach to storytelling that is more important than the other these days.
Yeah. Which is both a hard answer to hear and a great answer to hear, because there's no formula you can follow, which means there's no formula you need to follow. Any idea is possible.
Yeah, well, that's the reality. Is there, as I said, at the early in my career, it was much cleaner and clearer. There was just movies and TV and maybe some shorts. Now there is 10-second TikToks to, something on Instagram, to Snapchat content. There's so many options and so many ways of going, that it is, to your point, challenging. And for me, running a business, not only is it challenging because of the fracturing of the industry and there's so much going on, but also the industry's trying to figure themselves out. You've got all these new streamers, and their executives are constantly coming and going and changing, and their vision and their goals are changing. So if you go and have a meet and greet with the studio and they say, okay, we're looking for this exact type of content, and you go, okay, great, I get it. I'm going to go off, I'm going to find it, I'm going to develop it. You come back, they've changed their mind, or they're no longer working at that company, because development, finding projects, getting them developed, and then getting to the point where you can speak to somebody about it, that's at least a year, sometimes two.
You have to have patience is one of the things. Yeah,
absolutely. Patience, and being able to be nimble and pivot, because things are so, they're constantly shifting and changing.
Right. Yeah. And you can't, even though you might have a good idea, you have to be able to bend with that idea too, and say, well, your idea is good, but it might work better in this format or in a different way. Yeah,
exactly. Like it might be better to start this as a little short and build some audience, and then go and do it in a longer format.
Totally. Or this would be a great game, and the creators never played a game before, but it's like, that just might be how it works.
Exactly.
So do we need to bounce off that a little bit in terms of where pitches come from? I am kind of the mind that a good pitch can come from anywhere, but Kelly says, "Hi, Catherine, your journey is truly remarkable." And their question is, how do you look at acquiring IP? Are you interested in hearing from new writers, or do you pursue IPs that are already trending? So, I mean, and I suppose this question is really like, are you looking for original ideas? You're talking about Camp Bonkers, or are you looking to bounce off things that are developed, or both? And where do good pitches come from?
Well, good pitches can come from anywhere. You just never know where a good pitch is going to come from. As a general rule, which is probably not what you want to hear, it is very hard for brand new creators to be able to pitch. You've got to often find your way in to get an agent who can validate who you are, your creativity, and then bring you to producers such as myself. Because we don't typically open ourselves up to pitches, because there's a lot of work to get a project or a property to a place that can even be sold. And again, since in our case, we're a relatively small company, that's why we have our criteria. And we typically look for something that has some audience awareness up front. In the case of Camp Bonkers, that was unique. It didn't have, it's completely from scratch. But in another project, Junk Bots, that we did, it had a pre-existing toy. So we generally go down that path. And a lot of studios are like that, which is why the opportunity these days is that it is so much easier to make your own content and get out there and find a way. You guys are probably far better at that than I am, but figuring out how to build some awareness and fandom on a short, or some imagery or something that will give you that backbone foundation to be able to come to a producer and say, hey, I can bring you this much awareness. Here's why you should work with me.
Right. So you got this sort of, you've done some of your homework already, and you've done some of the heavy lifting, and not just being like, put it all on the producer.
Yeah,
absolutely. So sort of related to that, Marcel has a question here. It's, he would like to know how you deal with the feeling that a project is not good enough. I think this is a very common artistic problem. I'm always changing projects because I think they're not that good. So I'm just wondering, is there some kind of common metric you're looking at when you're looking at ideas, or, you're developing film or something? I have my own answer to this, I suppose, but, where, as someone who's now kind of moving these projects forward, at what point are you like, yeah, this is one that seems right and seems exciting, and that will capture an audience?
Yeah, and there's no one way. But if a property comes to us, I'll make some phone calls or have my development executive do some research to see if we think there's a market for it. And we're always having meetings and talking to industry colleagues and executives to see who's buying what and who needs what. So that is one way of figuring out what properties we're going to spend some resources on and take a risk and figure out if we can bring it to life. But if you're working on projects that you don't feel passionate about, if there's a way to step back and say, okay, what am I learning? And that can be the passion. What am I learning from this experience? Because animation or filmmaking is the most collaborative endeavor you can be a part of. And every role, no matter how low or high you are in the food chain, and the team is highly important, because it builds on each other. And so giving it everything you can, even if you feel like it doesn't matter and you're not as passionate about it, will help ultimately bring the greatest vision to the screen. So anyway, I'm not sure if I'm answering his question perfectly, but it's not easy to find those things that you're passionate about, because it's a job and you're coming in as a work for hire. And so take away, try and listen, try and speak up. If you don't like something too, find a way to share your thoughts in a way that can be positive, as opposed to the other. How you can, give that feedback and try and bring it to a place that feels better for you is always something that's if handled the right way, it's appreciated by producers.
Absolutely. I think that's so important in just any creative pursuit. What we do is art. And I think that gets sometimes overlooked a little bit in the business side of things, which is an important part of it because that allows the art to happen. So they can't have one without the other. But yeah, being able to get something from any idea, any pitch, any project you're working on is so important. Putting yourself into it, is really, really the pursuit in and of itself.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we've got a couple more questions here, maybe a little bit of time for that. I've got a real quick one here. This one came in real early. This has been a straight up awesome webinar. This is from Miles, who's developing their own animated franchise is their dream project. Since working in Tokyo, have you worked on producing or helping cross-market anime? Have you done any further sort of anime work after working in Japan?
I haven't directly done any anime work, but I've taken that artistic approach into a lot of the work I've done, or I've also used and worked and collaborated with some of the artists. So, for example, when I was developing, or I wasn't personally, but Dave Filoni and the team were developing the look for Clone Wars, George Lucas said he wanted an anime influence in the style of the characters and the show overall. And so I took the team and I reached back to Tokyo and found some artists that could collaborate on the original character designs and influence and what we were doing. I also, when I was producing and adapting Invincible, used some of that experience and worked with some Japanese artists and even Korean artists that had an anime influence into the style of the filmmaking.
Right, that's awesome. Do you speak Japanese?
I used to speak fluently. It's been a while, but it's funny when I go over there, it seems to come back.
Right. No, I was just thinking of, I've worked on productions, where you're working with, in France or in Korea, and you're just like, oh man, the production team speaks both languages, and it just always fascinates me that it's like, what an amazing, talk about teamwork, being able to speak each other's languages is incredible.
Yeah, and it's really helpful. I mean, often my Japanese is not anywhere near what it used to be. I'll work with translators, but I can at least tell if they're translating what it is I'm trying to say in a way that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not always a direct translation.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. But yeah, you don't want it just close enough. You're like, no, I need this to be right. Otherwise, we're not going to get what we need back.
Well, it's tricky, right? Because it's a creative, as you said, endeavor, and it's nuanced. And sometimes that explanation can actually take you off base very quickly.
Right. Fair enough. Christian has a question that's looking into the future. Do you have any predictions or opinions or thoughts regarding AI and the future of the film and animation industry?
Wow. That's something that I'm really wrapping my head around right now, but I do believe it's going to play a huge, huge role. Recently, somebody just shared a new software for creating pitch decks using AI software approaches, and it's mind-boggling what can be done even right now. So I do think that AI, we're looking at it for some of our storytelling endeavors at the moment. It will play a significant role, but I can't predict exactly what that is, but I think it'll be almost integrated seamlessly into the filmmaking process in the relative near future.
Yeah. I heard a funny joke the other day from someone in our staff who teaches machine learning, and it's kind of an inside joke, I think, which is when that question gets asked, is to just ask the computer, because they'll be able to, they're the ones that will have the answers. No, it's like a cat chasing its tail in that way.
That's true.
Yeah,
the Matrix is here.
They're the ones who are supposed to be able to predict it. So, so we got a couple of just very shorter questions, more personal ones here. Is there a highlight of your career? I mean, you've mentioned a few, but is there something specific? Maybe not even a project, but a moment in your producing career that you're sort of most proud of, or maybe something you learned that you carry with you?
Oh boy. There's quite a few. It's hard to pick one. I'm really proud of the the Angry Birds movie, especially the first one. And the reason is when we set out to produce and adapt Angry Birds from, green bouncing balls and red bouncing balls with very little narrative, at that point, no one had really been able to successfully bring a game to life commercially in a way that had a positive response from the fans. And so there was quite a bit of negativity and snark in the social media world around us doing this endeavor. And ultimately, the results were really positive with the fans, and the first Angry Birds movie did really well around the world. So that was really satisfying, because ultimately, while we want to grow a property's audience and base, we want to make the original fans happy. So that was really satisfying. And the other one was, of course, Clone Wars.
Yeah.
And I remember Dave Filoni and I went to a Star Wars convention, and it was the first time we were going to share with the fans what the Clone Wars was going to look like. And it was really quite scary because no one had seen it. And the great thing was, because he could do it, George set us up, and we were working in a very secret bubble at the ranch in Marin County. And very few people had seen anything or knew what we were doing. And so we went up on the stage, and we were being, interviewed and talked about the process and what we've been doing. And then at the end, we shared a little clip, and it was amazing. It was a standing ovation. People were screaming and cheering, and so we knew we were onto something.
Totally. Well, it's so great, because other than the games, like the Clone Wars was, I mean, I'm speaking as a Star Wars nerd right now, but was really that first step outside of maybe the Ewoks special of stepping outside of the big feature live action world, right? And now with the advent of Disney Plus and, the games and stuff, and just all the whole world of Star Wars. I mean, some of the characters from the Clone Wars are now getting their own live action TV shows. So, I mean, it's just.
But back then, when we started doing that, when I got hired and I was the first person brought on, there was no Disney in the picture. Yeah. They were trying to figure out, how do you continue this beautiful, legacy and characters, and bring younger kids along with it, and continue to sell all the, toys and keep the franchise going. And we had no idea that we're really sowing the seeds for the future the way we did.
Totally. Blazing a trail. I mean, yeah. Well, that's such a great place to sort of be in at that time. If you put your mind where, like, you're so naive to it, right? Of like, what could ever be predicted 15 years later, right? Of what's
I mean, but I knew there was something. I knew it was really special. Just like way back when I was working on What a Cartoon, I remember my boss at the time, I was really new to the business early in my career. And he said, Catherine, what we're doing is it's going to be something you're going to look back on and be amazed at. We're creating history. We're creating franchises and characters that are going to be beloved around the world. And I remember thinking, really? How? And now, who doesn't know the Powerpuff Girls?
Exactly.
And you worked on it.
I worked on it. And then you've got, Tartovsky, who's doing all kinds of amazing stuff still. So what a great.
Again, he's a great guy. But
yeah, totally. Amazing. Awesome. Well, I think we have time for one last question. I always hope this question comes up, because I think it's just a fun way to end it. But Elizabeth asks, if you could, is there any advice you could give to your younger self? Not to worry. It's all going to be great. Okay. And every challenge or everything that may not turn out the way you'd hoped it would is actually putting you on the path that you should be on. Yeah, that's great. Isn't that it's like a butterfly effect, right? It's like the decision you make today, it's going to take you somewhere. So sometimes you just gotta ride the wave, and sometimes you'll end up running your own studio in beautiful Vancouver, BC. So exactly, and what an incredible
incredible journey I've had. I've been very fortunate in the fact that I've ended up here in really the center of the universe for digital storytelling. I couldn't be happier.
It's awesome. And we couldn't be more thankful to have you join us here at Vancouver Film School, whether it's virtual or otherwise. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you better, to hear from you. I know you've inspired a lot of people here in the chat, a lot of energy going on there. So thank you so much for your advice, for your insight, for your candor as well, and all the best, of course. And we hope to have you back. I mean, I could do a whole hour just on Clone Wars, of course.
Maybe one day.
On single episodes. I'm sure that's how much of a nerd I am. But and I'm sure there's some people here that would agree with me. But yeah, thank you so much. We're excited to see the projects that are coming out of your studio in the next few months here and into January. We're excited about that and wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you. And great to meet you guys. I hope to meet some of you someday at Winds on Sky.
Awesome.
Thanks for your time,
wonderful.
Colin. This is great. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks. Me too. Appreciate it. Good night, everybody.
Night,
and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.